throughout the course of this series, we're going to be talking and using the word desire a little bit. And the word desire simply means this. It means having a strong feeling of wanting to have something or to do something. So when you think about that person that's really cute and you get that kind of little butterfly feeling in your stomach, or when you want to send that person a message, or when you want to sit next to the person that you like and maybe, I don't know, hold their hand or touch them, oh my goodness. They're all kind of desires that as middle schoolers you might be experiencing. And if you're not yet experiencing, you probably will one day experience. They're desires that we all have as human beings. And can I tell you something? God actually created us to have desires. And so if you hear nothing else from me over the course of tonight, this is what I want you to hear. Your desires are not a bad thing. Your desires are not a bad thing. The fact that you're interested in or curious about relationships and everything that entails isn't actually a bad thing. It's not something that we should feel awkward or embarrassed to talk about, even though so many of us do, because it's actually how God designed us. It's actually how God designed us. The problem comes, though, when we don't know what to do with our desires. When we don't know how to think about them, when we don't know how to talk about them, when we don't know how we're meant to act upon them, that's when it becomes an issue. And that's when things get really tricky. It gets really tricky when we don't know what to do with it. But I think there's an answer here. I believe God actually gives us almost a roadmap to know how to navigate these feelings that we might have. And so tonight we're going to be stepping in and we're going to be looking at some of this stuff. Because God actually cares. He cares about what we do with our desires. He cares about what we do with our desires. A long time ago, people who really loved the Lord wrote down a bunch of stuff that ended up in the Bible. And one of these people was a man named Paul. Everyone say Paul. Paul. Now, Paul is a really significant figure in the Bible. He actually wrote most of the New Testament. And when we're talking about the New Testament, we often call them like books of the Bible. What Paul wrote weren't books, they were actually letters. So when we're reading anything that Paul wrote in the New Testament, they're actually letters that he wrote to people and different church communities that he was a part of to be able to instruct them on ways to live in a way that was pleasing to God. And so today, what we're going to be looking at is just a small excerpt from one of these letters from a book in the Bible called Romans that I think is able to give us some wisdom to know what to do when we're talking about relationships, respect, and red flags. It comes from Romans 12, verse 1 to 2. It says this, therefore, everyone say therefore. Beautiful. I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. We're going to keep this really short and sweet tonight, New Life Youth, because there are just two key things that I want to pull from this verse. And the first is this. When talking about our desires, when trying to work out what to do with our desires, the number one thing that we need to do is we need to know God's love. We need to know God's love. See, Paul started off in this verse by talking about who God is, and that was someone who offers mercy. And mercy simply means getting compassion and kindness when you don't deserve it. If you guys are a part of a sporting team, when your coach doesn't make you run extra laps when you're late to training, that's mercy, because he's actually not giving you probably the punishment that you deserve in that moment. Because we're human, we all mess up all the time. Like all of us, every single person in this room messes up all the time in the way that we speak, in the way that we act, in the thoughts that we think. Every single one of us messes up. And this is called sin. This is called sin. And because God is so good, he is so holy, and he's so perfect, he actually cannot be in the presence of sin. And so sin, our mistakes, our shame, our stuff actually separated us from God. But the Bible tells us that God, in his great love and mercy, he sent his son, a man by the name of Jesus, to live a life on earth. For 33 years, he lived a perfect life, and he ended up going to the cross and dying a death on the cross. And on that cross, he took the weight of all of our mistakes and our stuff-ups and our thoughts and our he took the weight of all of it, and he hung there on the cross, and he died and then was resurrected 3 days later so that sin would no longer be a reason that we were separated from God. He paid the ultimate price. And I share that because God did everything he possibly could in that moment for us to know that we are loved, for us to know that he is someone that we can trust, for us to know that his plans and his ways are so good and are so perfect. And so that if he's asking us to do something or to live in a certain way, it's not coming from a place of him wanting to restrict us or put unnecessary rules on our life. It's actually coming from a place of his great love, wanting us to live a life and experience life to the full. And so when we have different desires, what we can do is we can actually come to God and trust that what he's asking us to do with those is actually the best way for us to live, because he is good and he wants the best for us. He showed us in the most ultimate and beautiful way possible through the cross. God cares about what we do with our desires. And that means that when it comes to our desires, we can actually choose to align our desires with what God asks. It means we can choose to align what we think about, what we feel, our desires with what God's plan for our desires actually is, because his ways are perfect. Paul explained in Romans that we should respond to our desires in a way that is pleasing to God. It doesn't say that we're meant to get rid of them. It doesn't say that we're meant to ignore our desires, but rather respond to them in a way that's pleasing to God. It's actually impossible to ignore or get rid of our desires. They are just a natural part of being human, but we can respond to them in a way that is pleasing and honorable to God, ourselves, and others. And we can do this because we know that God loves us and his plans are so much better than our own. Sounds great, right? Responding to our desires to align with God's plan, honoring ourselves, God, and others. Easy peasy, no problem, right? Yeah, if only it was that simple. If only it was that simple. Because it's one thing to read a verse like this and read about God's plan for our life and read knowledge-wise that he loves us and his plans are good. But what does that actually look like practically? What does it actually look like practically? Because a lot of the time it can be a lot more difficult than what it says. Because when we find ourselves curious to watch that video or send that text or send that photo, when we find ourselves curious and interested in these things, what does it practically look like to respond to those desires in a way that is pleasing and honorable to God? That is where step number 2 comes in, which is shape your thoughts. Everyone say shape your thoughts. Beautiful. Because look at the second part of Paul's letter here. It says this: we need to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. If we want to be able to actually respond to our desires in a way that is pleasing to God, we need to shape our thoughts. We need to renew our mind, which simply means that we need to change and help transform the way that we think about things. And this is not, let me just say, this is not something we can do in our own strength. This is something we actually need God's help with. And it means actually going to God and being like, God, this is what I'm thinking or feeling at the moment. What is your plan in this? How do you want me to respond? I need you, if this is not of you, I need you to transform my mind right now. I need you to help shape my thoughts right now, because this is difficult and it's hard and I don't know what to do with it. God wants us to come to him so that he can help renew and transform our mind. And when we do this, we will be able to operate in such a way that helps us identify red flags, live a life of respect to ourselves, to others, and to God, but also enter into relationships that are healthy and that are good and that are honorable to God, because we have allowed our mind to be transformed and renewed, and we've allowed our thoughts to be shaped by what God asks of us. And so, to actually know what this looks like, we're going to break it down into 3 different things. We're going to first of all look at a red flag. We're going to second of all look at what it looks like to respect. And third of all, we're going to look at what that means for relationships. And so number 1, red flags. This week, what I want you to do is I want you to start noticing them. At the start of this sermon, I said a bunch of just fun ones, right? That don't actually mean so much. I want you to actually start thinking about what are maybe some red flags that actually negatively impact other people or myself. Maybe it is the way that other people are treating you. Maybe it is the way that people talk about you or the way that you talk about other people. Maybe it's the way, or maybe you're put in positions or situations where you just feel uncomfortable, or people are saying things where you're just like, it's just not sitting right with me. You need to be able to start noticing some red flags. Because now that you know that God has a plan for our desires, now that you know that God's plan is good and perfect and pleasing, anything that doesn't align with that, we need to just start having our little red flag antenna on and start waving it to be able to identify when we are experiencing red flags in our world. So number 1, red flags, you need to start noticing them. Number 2, and this is one I really want to just focus in on today. When it comes to respect, New Life Youth, we should be the ones that set a new standard. We need to be the ones that set a new standard. Can I just tell you, we live in a society where disrespect to other people is so common. It happens in the way that we talk, in the way that we act, even in the way that we think. We often do not show respect to the people around us. I just want to acknowledge, it might be that you are with a group of your friends. And the way that you are talking about another person, potentially even the way that you're talking about another person's body, if that is not aligning with recognizing that they are a Margot Day, that they are created in God's image, it's not respect. If you are saying things about another person that you would not say if you would not say it in church, if you would not say it in front of your parents, can I just challenge you, it might not actually be one of respect. We need to set a new standard for what it means for respect. When you choose to engage and watch things, or send messages, or think thoughts that actually dehumanize people and don't actually allow people to be acknowledged as created in the image of God, we are not showing them respect. And we are called, New Life Youth, to set a new standard of what it means to respect one another. So when you are with that group of friends and people are talking about someone else, they're talking about someone else in a way that isn't respectful, you can actually in that moment stand up and say, hey, let's stop talking about this. And if that's not going to work, just remove yourself, because we are called to set a new standard. When you start thinking thoughts that are around someone else in a way that isn't respectful, actually acknowledge that and say, hey God, I need you to show me what it means to show respect in this situation. When you start talking about people or watching things or sending things that are not actually respecting people, you need to have a moment, a check in your heart and your spirit where you say, God, what does it mean for me to show respect in this moment? We, New Life Youth, need to set a new standard for respect. Set a new standard for respect. So we need to identify red flags. We need to set a new standard for respect. And finally, we need to, with our relationships, share it with the right people. Share it with the right people. No matter how awkward you might feel or uncomfortable you might feel talking about some of this stuff, it is so important that we talk with wise people in our worlds around what we're thinking, feeling, and doing. It is so important. It might not be your parents, and that's okay. Maybe you want to talk about it with your small group leader. Maybe you want to talk about it with a teacher or with a trusted adult. But we actually need to bring wise people into our worlds that are going to be able to help navigate this stuff. I do this too. I've got people in my world that I talk about this stuff with because it is so important that we are not doing it alone. It is so important that we talk about it with people who are wiser, who have more experience than us, and who are going to help walk with us through it, because this stuff is so difficult sometimes and it's so confusing and it comes with so much emotion and feeling and all of that stuff, and having someone so much wiser than us step in and be able to speak into it is so helpful, which is why you have small groups. Talk about it in your small groups. Talk about it with your small group leaders. And let's actually not have red flags, respect, and relationships be a taboo topic, but something that we actually talk about in this church and talk about in our small groups, because it's important. It is so important. Does that sound okay? Yeah? I also just wanted to acknowledge there might be some people in this room that, as I'm talking about some of this stuff, you've done some things, said some things, thought some things that maybe right now you're like, this isn't right. Or maybe there comes with a sense of shame or of guilt at the moment. Can I just say, God is a God of restoration. He is a God who meets you where you're at and who doesn't condemn, who doesn't cause shame, but who actually calls you higher. Who calls you higher and says, I created you for better things than this. I created you for better things than this. I love you. I have called you for a purpose, and I am asking you to help hand this over to me. This is God speaking with me. Hand this over to me so that I am able to walk with you through this. There is no shame or condemnation in Jesus. There just isn't. And if you are feeling any sense of shame or condemnation right now, that is not from God. Really, that is not from God. He is a God of grace, and he is a God who wants to restore and make whole and make new that which has been robbed from us or that which we have done.